That's amazing, the reaction. Instant silence, just with that, with that hammer. Good morning to all of you here, and good afternoon to those, and good evening to those who are tuning in from wherever you are in the world. My name is Melissa Fleming, and I am the Undersecretary General for Global Communications here at the United Nations, and it's such a pleasure for me to welcome you all here in person. I think we all just feel so excited when we can actually see so many real faces in the room attached to bodies and not just little dots on the screen. So it's really wonderful for those of you who are here to have you here, and it's a very special town hall because we also have a new President of the General Assembly, President of the 77th session of the United Nations General Assembly, His Excellency Csaba Kőrösi. And today's town, So today's town hall is designed to give you, our very valued civil society representatives, the opportunity to learn more about His Excellency Kőrösi's priorities, his vision, and it's also for us and for him, it's an important opportunity to share your important perspectives and also your proposals. So I would like to thank the President of the General Assembly for convening this event and placing the voices of civil society at the forefront of our collective work. And that is, as you know, to achieve a more peaceful, equitable, and prosperous world. I think you will all agree that this world and this vision for a world is needed more than ever, and we need you to help us. Civil society has always played an integral role in the mission of the UN, and you are key to achieving inclusive and effective multilateralism too. So that's why we're also so pleased to have you here. The United Nations Secretary General calls for this, the engagement of civil society in inclusive multilateralism in his report, Our Common Agenda. If you haven't read Our Common Agenda, it's very inspiring reading. It's a vision for a much better world, and it was introduced at last year's General Assembly, and it's a vision that we're working towards in the months and years to come. So on behalf also of the department I lead, the Department of Global Communications, I'd like to thank you also for joining our advocacy efforts to promote the Sustainable Development Goals, which are and remain our blueprint for a better world, and more specifically around climate action, around tackling hate, and also one of our key goals is in the department that I lead is to tackle hate speech, mis and disinformation that is creating such a toxic information environment, and it's making it more difficult for us to achieve the goals that we're trying to work on. So thank you for being advocates for change. You have also helped us, and you yourself independently have reached millions of people around the world. Your Excellency, President Kőrösi, your vision highlights the importance of providing solutions to the world's problems. I mean, that's really key for us at the UN, not just to talk about the gloom and doom and how terrible the world is. We could do that all day, but it is really our role, and this is the absolute priority of his presidency, to provide solutions to the world's problems and to incorporate them, and through his solutions, through solidarity, sustainability, science, youth, and partnerships initiative. So you speak of the need to transform sustainability, also to build trust, to work together, to implement integrated systemic solutions, to follow science's lead, and respect the United Nations Charter. And you see these as essential factors contributing to the future of peace and prosperity for our planet. And such a solutions-oriented vision is exactly what we as an international organization must embrace, and it does provide a clear lens through which we can all approach the challenges that we face. We've just lived through a global pandemic. It's not even over. We have a climate crisis that keeps getting worse. We've seen environmental degradation, continuing conflicts, a terrible war, rising inequalities, so we need hope and solutions at all levels, and civil society will be and remains a key stakeholder in our efforts to identify and apply such solutions, which is why we look forward to hearing your reflections today. So before I present His Excellency, I would like to note that today's event is available in the 6 official languages of the United Nations. So you all have your earpieces there. If needed, tune in to the language of your choice. In the room, you can press the button and find your preferred language. For those of you watching online, you can select the language you want to hear at the drop-down box on your screen. For those of you posting on social media, do follow us on Twitter. We are at UN, but also at UN DGC_CSO and at UN PGA. We are still trying to be that force for good on Twitter, even though we're extremely concerned about the sharp rise of hate that we have witnessed since the new leadership has taken over the platform. We ask you to help us be that force for good on Twitter today and use the hashtag, you see it right in front of you, it's hashtag UN with civil society in your posts. Now it's my honor to present His Excellency, the President of the General Assembly. President Kőrösi has dedicated his professional life to public service, holding various posts in his home country of Hungary, and acting as a founding member of the Hungarian Scientific Panel on Climate Change. He has also served as head of mission to Greece and the United Arab Emirates. In addition, Mr. Kőrösi has served as ambassador and permanent representative of Hungary to the United Nations here, and as vice president of the 66th session of the UN General Assembly. He has a long history in working alongside civil society. He played an important role in the preparation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the SDGs as co-chair of the Open Working Group of the General Assembly. And in this capacity, he's closely engaged with civil society to ensure the inclusion of voices of diverse stakeholders. His attention to and respect for civil society has carried into his presidency as he continues to emphasize the importance of including civil society perspectives in impact-focused discussions. So I'm going to welcome you to deliver your remarks, and this is going to be followed by statements centered on solutions from several members of civil society here today, and then we will open the floor to questions. We're looking forward to a dynamic discussion, and Excellency, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, dear USG Fleming. Good morning, dear friends in Turtle Bay. Good afternoon in Europe and Africa. Good evening in Asia, and good late evening in Australia. I'm very grateful for you for being here or for being with us. Governments do not have the monopoly on good ideas. It was a short quote from a message sent to the heads of state and government during the high-level week. I had the pleasure to address them at the opening of the general debate, the high-level week. And it has never been more true than now when we are facing with the most complex, interlinked, multi-layered crisis in the last 40 years. Without going too much into details how those crises came together, You went through the COVID, you went through the pandemic, you went through the economic downturn, you are experiencing the impact of the sovereign debt crisis, you are experiencing the impact of the food insecurity, energy crisis, and you are experiencing the impact of the climate crisis and loss of biodiversity. In the face of these very complex challenges, should we just raise up our hands that I give up, or now recommit ourselves that no, there are solutions. There will be solutions. There must be solutions. And the solutions must come from all of us. These are shared ideas, shared ways, shared objectives. We created the goals jointly together with you. It was in 2013, 14, 15 when we created the SDGs. It was in 2015 when jointly with you we created the Paris Agreement on climate change. It was jointly with you when we created the Addis Ababa Protocol of how to finance sustainability transformation. And it is going to be with you jointly, I hope, later this month in Montreal, when we recreate the goals how to address the loss of biodiversity on this globe. Without you, the ideas would not have come together. But without you, those ideas would never come to implementation. It is not the task of a couple of hundreds of politicians or diplomats, but it's a task of 8 billion people. We are talking about a transformation that is going to determine the fate and future of the current and coming generations. I see many of you could be even my grandchildren, grandsons and granddaughters. But your grandsons and granddaughters will feel the consequences of the decisions we are taking together with you. So I would like to invite you once again to the table. We are about to launch 15 negotiating processes in the General Assembly. 13 out of them are directly or indirectly addressing the issue of transformation. What kind of world are we going to have here? What kind of organization are we going to have here in the Turtle Bay? And what kind of institutional architecture across the world we need in order to serve us in the journey of transformation. So my plea to you, when we think about transformation, be bold, be forward-looking, be imaginative, be provocative, but also be pragmatic. Be impact-oriented. Focus on the exact moment, exact issue, and the exact crisis you would like to address, but always keep in mind the big picture. Because our proposals, our steps, our deeds will land in a landscape that involves everything. Each and every step of ours have implications on many, many other fields. We measure it or not. We like it or not. So it's very important that our policies, our plans, our projects always have direct impacts and side impacts, so-called externalities. And what will be important for you and for your children is the overall balance of the designed impact and the signed impacts, to make sure that we move forward and not backwards. And this year, as the USG Fleming mentioned, our major task within the broader context of transformation and keeping our eyes way beyond 2030, this year the major task is to make sure that the implementation of the SDGs could be brought back to track, because we are not there. On many instances, the implementation of the shared goals, what we adopted together with you, crafted and adopted together with you, on many of those goals, we are further away from our objectives today than we were in 2015. It might deserve a good thinking. Why is it so? Is it COVID? Is it something missing from it, methodology? Is it something we are missing from our commitments? Something is missing from our cooperation? Something is missing from our thinking? Or maybe something is missing from our shared responsibilities. We used to talk about our rights. I'm very glad. It is in the foundation of our existence. It's in the foundation of our organization here. We talk less about our responsibilities. We talk less about how we share those responsibilities. My own responsibility as a person, my own responsibility as a member of a community, and my own responsibility as a representative of a country. So I'd like to invite you to think bold, to keep your eyes on transformation, speak about solutions, be very pragmatic, and be provocative. Welcome on board. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I don't think that they will have a problem being bold and provocative, but I think we have an invitation really to think forward and not backward, as the President of the General Assembly said, and take responsibility. And thank you very much for those inspiring remarks. And as many of you know, at the beginning of November, we opened a call for statements from civil society to provide you with an opportunity to share with us statements of solutions. So in light of that, it is my pleasure to invite our first speaker, Bethany Brown. Ms. Brown represents the stakeholder group of persons with disabilities for sustainable development, and she's from the United States. She will speak on ways to achieve solutions through solidarity. Ms. Brown, the floor is yours.
Thank you. It's really a privilege to be here with you all today. I've been asked to speak with you about solutions through solidarity. This is something that the disability movement has done very well among ourselves. And so I'm here today to talk about what that solidarity could look like to make sustainable development more inclusive for the 15% of the world's population who are persons with disabilities, and by extension, to all of us. On that note, I must point out that this town hall could include more of us if it had closed captioning and international sign language on the screen above. That said, I'd like to cover 3 fundamentals of our work that impact everyone: technology, data, and human rights. When it comes to multi-stakeholder implementation, particularly for COVID-19 related policies and programs, it is crucial for these partners to keep in mind Goal 17, Target 16, to ensure that they are mobilizing and sharing knowledge, expertise, technology, and financial resources. Governments should support research and access to scientific and technological knowledge on inclusion of persons with disabilities and facilitate access to and sharing of accessible and assistive technologies. Goal 17, Target 18 also encourages the enhancement of capacity building support to developing countries, including for least developed countries and small island developing states, to increase the availability of high quality, timely, and reliable data. Governments should collect and disaggregate data by disability, by age, and many other factors to learn about barriers and to measure disability-inclusive response and recovery actions, and to adequately assess the impact of programs. We know that we are not there yet when it comes to data. Governments should invest in data for disability-inclusive development and build capacity in stakeholders, especially organizations of persons with disabilities, to be prepared to survey their communities. They should support communities in gathering citizen-generated data to complement traditional data sources and highlight information that cannot be captured in other ways. And last and most crucially, solidarity means taking a human rights-based approach. When I think about what human rights are, I like to think about them as governing the relationship between individuals and governments. So it's about the responsibility of governments to the people that are there. And we recommend promoting, developing, and strengthening the capacity and competence of international cooperation agencies and multilateral financial institutions on rights-based disability inclusion. Many of you already know our motto is "Nothing about us without us." Governments should support participation of persons with disabilities through their representative organizations to ensure a human rights-based approach in the design, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation of all efforts. This is true for all marginalized groups, including older persons, indigenous persons, and others, all of us. President Kőrösi, I know this is something that you welcomed in your work towards what became the Sustainable Development Goals. Lastly, as we see private-public partnerships becoming a more and more common model in funding and implementing development programs, we want to remind everyone here that setting objectives that align with international human rights obligations should be the most basic floor. They shouldn't be an aspiration. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bethany Brown, for your powerful statement and your plea that a human rights-based approach is taken for persons with disabilities, but also all marginalized groups. I think we can all get behind that. Thanks for your important statement. And now I invite Mr. Binod Anand from the Confederation of NGOs of Rural India to give his statement on solutions through science. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. It's a really honor. Namaste from India to all of you who are here. Let me tell you that this is a little excitement and a real pleasure that civil society is getting too much of space and prestige and such a global fora. I'm thankful to you, His Excellency, and to the United Nations for that. I come from the organization, it's a confederation of NGOs of rural India. And we consider rural is not something which is in the villages, but we find that wherever there are SDG challenges exist, that's a rural. That's, again, we have to evolve. So that's kind of, we have a 7,000 NGOs network, works on the philosophy of great Rabindranath Tagore, who had said where the mind is without fear and the head is held high long back. So there are various issues which we want to put up here on this platform, but precisely I will speak about the collaborative effort, the scientific temper, how we can create some solutions for that, and how we have reached here. See, this is an era of climate change, and you all know that we have crossed 800 billion of population. And then by 20, in coming days, very soon, the India will be the most populous country in the world. We are going to 800 million. That's quite a good number, and that's why I want the House to think. You think that when the California, Florida, and even 2-3 more states, most populated state of the United States of America, to feed them, to take about their housekeepings and all the challenges. That's quite a big challenge, and that's how we think about the food, not only the food security, but other issues which we are struggling through and trying to resolve it with the science. And here we want to take you, with the permission of the Excellency, back to the the historical places through which we have created some solutions. It's not the modern science, but it's a traditional science also which we need to take care of. So it's a modernity versus tradition we should not get conflict with. And the pandemic has shown us the way. It was a real challenge in how to resolve all those things. Science is really a beautiful gift to the humanity. We should not have distorted it. We had distorted it by various means. And that's how we have seen the challenges, especially the climate change, and the last 2 years what we have faced, the pandemic. I will come for the solutions and how the civil society can work with that. In my country, I will give you a very good example. We use nano technology-based fertilizer. It's in one of the largest cooperative in the world. It calls His Excellency IFCO, Indian Farmers Fertilizer Cooperative. And that has created a nano urea, where now the farmers don't have to follow the drudgery to carry 40 kg on his shoulder. He just carry a bottle, and that's how he used to create his field fertile. So that's a kind of scientific intervention which we require. We do have a network of Indian Council of Agriculture Research, IITs, and so many other institutions which are trying to follow the things, trying to create the things in a different way. We'll take you to the climate change issues. We do have a 1.5 degree challenge, might be in coming time 2 degree, and what is going to happen, we are not very clear about that. In some report, we speak something, in some report, we speak something. But where are the solutions? Solution is to come out from the fossil fuel, come out from the diesels, come out from the petroleums, and more involved in the high efficiency solar cells, solar rooftop projects, and so on and so on. We have in our place called a Bio-Urja portal, where we, through civil society, we get with the farmers, we work with them, we work with the masses, and trying to do the things in a different way. International Solar Alliance is one of the best examples, which you must have heard of also, and this house must have experiencing all. His Excellency and my dear friends, this is an era of collaborative governance. We have to converge our thoughts, our ideas, and to find out the solutions. And not only finding, the most important thing is to executing it. And that execution does not happen in islands. It cannot happens, in one part of the world. Getting back, way back in around 90s, the Human Development Report, it has said that 91% of the benefit of globalization is utilized by the 19% of the global population. Things have changed, but still that collaborative effort is required. And that's how the intervention of United Nations is required to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Can we have this kind of meetings, this kind of collaborative meeting where the heads of the civil society, the army of this, the civil society organization, maybe it cooperative, maybe it NGO, maybe in our country we say farmers producer organization, can come together, can be it a little regional, can be in South Asia also. We invite His Excellency to do these kind of meetings with the help of United Nations in other part of the globe, and learn from each other. South can learn from North, one region can learn from another, because this challenge is the global one, but the solutions are local. And that's how the science is required. 1 billion, one planet, one solar, one grid. So many examples are there. In G20, most of the countries, most of you through civil society organization will come to India, and in hundreds of meetings you will think of about providing this kind of solutions. So that's how, through civil society network, through our collaborative approach, if the UN gives us the space in a regional level also, and take this empowerment to those places, we can have the tech solutions, and we have so many other aspects which has not been a practice so far in executing these global challenges. Because climate change, in fact, is a global challenge, but the solution is exactly local. So we have to be very global in approach. That's what we have to think about, and that's what I will put up my statement on the rest. The most important aspect is where we need to learn more and more is about from the mixing traditional sciences with the modernity, and that's what we have learned from all those things. You must have heard about Chanakya. He is the father of diplomacy, he is the father of economics. Long back, whatever few thousands of years ago he has written, we are practicing in the United Nations, and the globe need that. Thank you very much. Let us join hands together and give us the space to address this poverty, conflict, climate change, inequality, and so on, and address this solution in a collaboration way. I invite you all to join us and work in collaboration. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, Excellency.
Thank you so much, Mr. Anand, for your important perspective. I think that we all agree that solutions are indeed local, or at least they can start that way, and at least we need to go and look for them. And so I think that was very inspiring. And our next speaker will be addressing us via a pre-recorded message in Spanish. So if those of you who don't speak Spanish, and yes, the translation is also in English. So it is Mr. Brian Sawibri from Visibles Guatemala, and he's going to be sharing also his view on solutions through sustainability.
¿Me dices ya?
Cuando quiera.
La juventud.
Youth is bringing about significant change defending human rights across the territory of Guatemala. Working hand in hand, students, women, indigenous people, and LGBTIQ+ persons are leading demands for quality public education, a decent public health system, and the defence of land. And all of this is happening at a high cost. State institutions that see their control over power and resources threatened have responded with violence and criminalisation. Further, political parties and decision-making institutions are not taking the contributions of youth seriously, nor their views or their claims, and are using us as a platform, tokenisation. None of this, though, is dissuading organised youth. Through coalitions, we have been working to strengthen ourselves, to develop capacities and to transform the country, working with urban and rural communities as well as with different identities to contribute to the shared struggles and defence of the rights of all persons. Guatemala in its youth has a force for change, and its strength lies in the confidence and shared complicity, and in the inability to accept no as an answer from adults, and the insistence on the fact that the future generations need to make the dream of a country a reality for people to live well with dignity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sawibri. And yes, I think that word, living with dignity, is really one that we all aspire to for every human being. And next, we hear from Ms. Zoe Craig Sparrow from Justice for Girls Outreach Society of Canada. She will share with us ways to achieve solutions through youth. Ms. Craig Sparrow, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you to everyone for the opportunity to be here with you all today. My name is Zoe Craig Sparrow. I am the Director of Indigenous Rights and Environmental Justice at Justice for Girls. Justice for Girls is a Canadian NGO that promotes social, economic, and environmental justice and an end to poverty, violence, and racism in the lives of teenage girls. We promote girls' human rights and advocate for young women's leadership to be at the forefront of law, policy, and programs that affect their lives. Young women have co-led our organization since 1999. We believe that girls are the experts of their own experiences and must define solutions to issues that affect their lives. Accordingly, our work is guided by the leadership and experience of young women for whom we've advocated for and who are or have been a part of our organization as volunteers, staff, interns, students, or board members. As it is essential that our team is representative of those who we serve, We have Indigenous and young women with experiences of poverty and violence on every level of our organization. This includes myself. I am an Indigenous young woman who was born and raised on the reserve, the Musqueam Reserve in Vancouver, Canada. I have been an activist since I was 12 years old and have worked internationally and domestically to advance children's rights, women's rights, Indigenous rights, and environmental justice. In 2012, at the age of 15, I participated in a submission to the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child and traveled to Geneva to speak with them directly. I and a 13-year-old girl named Reka Dillon Richardson were interns with Justice for Girls at the time, and we were the only children there in Geneva. Nonetheless, we were proof firsthand that children can not only understand their rights, but can recognize where their rights have been violated and can advocate for them. After being an intern, volunteer, and board member with Justice for Girls, I became the organization's co-director at the age of 21. I've experienced firsthand how support, empowerment, and respect of children's voices directly translates to successful advocacy, strong leadership, and the realization of human rights. Now, as a young woman, I've continued to mentor many young women and girls, standing beside them and giving them the tools and support they need to overcome the barriers they face and have their voices not only be heard, but listened to. This includes mentoring other children to promote their participation and amplify their voices at the international level. I've since supported 3 other girls to raise their concerns to the United Nations, a 15-year-old and an 18-year-old girl in 2020, and a 16-year-old this past spring in 2022. The importance of engaging, listening, and respecting the inputs and voices of youth cannot be overstated. This is especially important as we face the climate crisis, where youth are globally leading the fight against climate change. Children have a right to have their best interests be assessed and taken into account as a primary consideration in all government actions or decisions that concern them. Children's views must be solicited through accessible procedures and formats and given proper and meaningful consideration. Children's perspectives must be prioritized not only to ensure the fulfillment of their rights under the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, but because they often have the best and strongest leadership on how to improve the world for both present and future generations. Thank you very much. Hi, Sepka.
Thank you. Thank you, absolutely. Very inspiring, your speech, and that you were an activist since the age of 12, I think demonstrates exactly what you were trying to say. Yes, absolutely. Children don't just understand your rights as they know when they're also being violated. And listening and respecting the voices of youth should be our primary consideration as you are to inherit our world. And I know that and I know the Secretary General, I know the President of the General Assembly are always looking for ways to do it better and to make sure that we have youth not just kind of sitting somewhere off in the distance in a corner as an afterthought, but really integrated into the work that we do. So thank you for that inspiring statement. Our final statement comes to us via video from Zimbabwe. Mr. Nikpil Moyu from Global Partnerships for the Prevention of Conflict in Southern Africa, in the Southern Africa region, will present his views on ways to achieve solutions through partnerships.
My name is Ngobile Moyo. I'm the Regional Coordinator of Southern Africa Partnerships for the Prevention of Conflict. In short, it's called SAPEC. SAPEC is the GPAC Southern Africa region, and it coordinates the Southern Africa region's conflict early warning system under the African Union's Political Affairs, Peace and Security Department. Thank you, President of the General Assembly, His Excellency Kőrösi, for allowing us to participate in this key meeting. Indeed, the world needs effective solutions through strategic partnerships. This can be achieved through strengthening community cohesion and ensuring that no one is left behind by employing a hybrid, multi-sectorial approach that strategically convenes and connects local-level community actors with high-level actors from government, regional, continental, and global institutions such as the UN. Colleagues, now more than ever, global community cohesion is a must, as we are living in a world where the global challenges and pressures make it more convenient for the minority privileged countries and communities to do their own thing and leave the rest behind. We need to take all necessary steps and precautions to ensure that we do not further increase the glaring inequality gap by strengthening and supporting solidarity and cohesion-focused strategies and processes, because all lives matters and all voices matter. With these few words, I thank you for this opportunity to share these remarks in this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moyu. Yes, all voices matter, and I think that it's a really good segue now to ask the President of the General Assembly to reflect on the solutions, the comments, the presentations that you've just heard.
Thank you much indeed, Melissa. I'm really happy to hear what you just raised and said. And let me open you a small secret of the kitchen. Half an hour ago, I was at a brainstorming session with ambassadors. The central issue we try to address from different angles, from different continents, different levels of development countries, was how are we going to address transformation? What are we going to do with this world in this year, in the next 5 years, in the next 20 years? You are not surprised, I'm sure, that 99% of what you have just said was exactly the same how the ambassadors brought their ideas to the table. So there is a broad commonality of thinking. Let me reflect on some of the very concrete issues you have mentioned. Solidarity and data. We know that future will be sustainable or there will be no future. The way how we achieve that will be basically nature-based and digital, and the combination of the two. Both requires very, very profound work on data, because our development is and will be data-driven. Data is something we have to agree upon, which should be neutral, which should be measurable. Let me give you an example where data is very much missing, and work with data for the best of interest of the communities is very much needed. Climate change was mentioned here today, and we know that 80% of the impacts of climate we feel through water. On our daily lives, climate crisis takes a form of water crisis, basically, what we immediately face. But let's not forget, we still only talk about the necessity of integrating water and climate policies, but we have never done it. It's a huge mistake. We have never created a global water information system that could assist our global decision-making or decision-making on regional, country, or local levels. When in your organizations you are asked by your followers, your members, how much and what kind of water can we expect and count on with our plans and developments in 5 to 10 years' time from now? The honest answer is we don't know. But we could know much better. We have the science, and we have part of the data already, but we haven't put it together. So it will be a huge task ahead of us in the forthcoming 1 year, less than 1 year, to create in reality, together with you, how are we putting together, integrating water and climate policies based on data. And the data should serve our member states and our communities. let me invite you once again. Those 15 negotiating tracks that are about to start now will all begin their work with a kind of consultative intake phase, when we would like to create a common knowledge base among countries with the participation of all those who can bring that knowledge. Bring that knowledge from your experience, from your field, from science, from business, and many other fields. So please be prepared that January, February, March, partly even April, will be the phase on those negotiations when you have to tell us, tell everybody else, what you think on very, very concrete issues, keeping in mind the big picture. On the science, I truly believe that in a world where geopolitical divide, clashes, difference of interests, wars are dividing countries, to iron out common solutions is very, very difficult on ideological or political basis. So what can help us? What can help us is actually if we try basing our solutions and our decisions on scientific evidence. It is still not guaranteeing that we'll have the wisdom and the best solutions, but at least we are not going to debate the very, very basics, the evidence ground. And if we can agree on what are the evidences, it's a little bit better to create a common ground for designing solutions for the future. Science will never tell us what to do. We are not expecting science to tell politicians, decision makers, that that is what you must do. Science is in the position to tell us what are the options. And once the decision makers, be them political, economic, or other decision makers, take their decisions, science must be in the position to tell what might be the consequences of those decisions, in order to make sure that decisions taken together with you will have the best possible outcome. And there is one more function for science. We still don't have it yet. But I plead to you, please help us to create. We need to create a validation mechanism of the implementation of our decisions, particularly on sustainability transformation. For the time being, we are working on assumptions, but we need a more solid validation mechanism. That needs to be created within 1 year. One more big task for you as well. On climate change, I agree that it is one of the most existential challenges we are facing now. This generation and the generations after us. It is threatening the existence of entire communities and countries. It's a slow-killing process, but we know we are in that process already. The technologies, what we have today, can help us solving about 60% of the tasks we have. The rest is still to be developed. To be developed through scientific research and through applied science and technology development. We don't have much time. We are going to cross, I'm afraid, the 1.5 Celsius within a couple of years. Then 2 Celsius will be very, very close. And the impact between the 1.5 and 2 Celsius is not just half a degree, it's double, because it's a logarithmic scale. So the big issue for us, not only how to prevent further increase of the global temperature, but how can we develop science and technology to come back from that region, from that very, very dangerous region. And I fully agree that most of the deeds will be done on local levels. Because whatever we do in our daily lives, in our families, in our companies, in our local communities or countries, will determine for 90% what is going to happen to this atmosphere. But let us not forget also that there is a shared responsibility. We have one atmosphere. That one atmosphere will react on everything what we are doing, good or bad. And whatever we are emitting today will be there at least for 20, but in some cases 1,000 years. So what we do together today, it will determine our common conditions for the future for many, many, many decades. Therefore, yes, to a very large extent, what we can do is both on mitigation and adaptation is local, but never forget that we have a shared responsibility. Last but not least, on justice and girls. For me, it's much more than violence. Though I acknowledge that this is the most outraging part. When you see that vulnerable parts of our societies, girls, women, are subjected to violence. And my colleagues brought me some statistics a couple of days ago that every fourth woman in the world experiences some kind of violence during her lifetime. It's unacceptable. There are two basic questions, what Zoe also mentioned. One is a kind of doing justice, the other time making the transformation. Doing justice is to overcome the inequalities in chances, inequalities in possibilities. The speed we are doing it now would take 134 years to achieve full equilibrium, full justice, and full equality in chances. It is not something that we can agree. So we need to do much, much more. The other one is something that goes way beyond SDG 5. What might be the role of those who have a very different thinking, solving problems, addressing conflicts, addressing crises? The majority of the society, women. In September, I had the chance to convene a meeting of the female heads of state and government, women heads of state and government, who came for the general debate of the United Nations. I can tell you it was the most inspiring discussion I had during the high-level week. It is not a degradation of any other discussion, but it was of paramount importance and paramount interest. Very quickly it came out from the discussions of the heads of state and government who were given a question, how are you going to address the big crisis, in plural, of the world today? What might be your way of addressing? It came out within 5 minutes that women's leadership is transformative. So that's what I'm looking for in this presidency. We need transformation, and we need you on board, because you need to change the thinking. It is not a fight of one sex against the other. It is our common plea to change our common future. And you have the potential for that. And many, many thanks for the fight you are doing.
Thank you, Your Excellency. And now, civil society representatives also had the opportunity to propose questions in advance of our session today, and this gave us a wide range of voices and representing different geographies. And in our audience, we have two of those representatives that we'd like to start with. We'll take two questions at a time. So our first question from civil society comes from Caroline Merzwa from the Nor-Luce Mentoring Center for Youth. Ms. Merzwa, the floor is yours.
You. And thank you, His Excellency, for bringing us here together. It's been an honor to hear from fellow civil society representatives about their proposed solutions. I'm Caroline. I'm a fourth-year student at Lehigh University, and I represent an NGO based in Armenia, Nor-Luce Mentoring Center for Youth, that mentors adolescent girls, equipping them with the psychosocial supports, financial supports, and confidence for them to become future leaders in their communities. My question involves, how do we envision youth participation here at the UN? As youth, we can educate ourselves, spread awareness about relevant issues in our world, conduct research on best practices, but beyond that, there seems to be a barrier of institutions claiming that they are listening to youth, and then institutions maybe not taking that next step of directly incorporating and integrating voices of youth in our solutions into the policies that undergird our world. So my question that follows is, how can youth directly influence policymaking and propose solution creation here at the General Assembly and at the UN at large?
Thank you for that question. We'll take one more before turning to the PGA, as he is called, for the reply. Thank you so much, Ms. Merzwa. And I understand you're one of many from Lehigh University here with us today, so hello to all of you from Lehigh University. It's great to have you here. Okay, we can give you a hand. Our second question comes from Ms. Ruby Guillen. Guillen, I think I got that right. We are glad to have you join us here today. Where are you? Oh, there you are. Did I pronounce your name right, or please repeat it so that we can all get it right?
Yes, it's Guillen.
Guillen, thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Ruby Guillen. I represent National Association of Social Work, Technology Council, and social workers were known to advocate and engage in social justice. So from a technological perspective, there's a massive gap between people that have technologies and those that don't. And that creates an incredible social injustice in so many ways. So leads to my question to you. How do we best collaborate with those who held technology as a powerful asset to build bridges to connect marginalized groups to resources and knowledge to improve their circumstances? That's my question. Thank you, Your Excellency.
Excellency, the floor is yours to respond to those questions.
Thank you much. Thank you much, Caroline, and thank you much for raising very important issues. On participation, let me tell you in advance that I would like to go way beyond participation. I would like to go to how to influence. But let me start with the participation. As we discussed it in the last 1 hour or so, now what is on the table is your future. What is on the table is our future, and what is on the table is the future of your children. So it would be absolutely insane to think that somewhere in a dark room we would come to some kind of decision and giving it to you that this is your future, go home and implement. I can imagine what your reaction would be for that, rightly so. There are 2 ways, 3 ways how to chip in, how to be part of the journey. First and foremost, this organization is a primarily intergovernmental organization that is trying to incorporate many, many other actors. But let me first stop on the intergovernmental side. The most direct way how you can influence is within your own countries. When governments send their instructions to the permanent representations here for the negotiations, those instructions are supposed to be a kind of synthesis of the interest, suggestions, notions coming from different walks of life in those given countries. So I believe the first and foremost area of activities where the participation should be beefed up is back in our countries, to make sure that the national representation is a national representation, full scale. But we know that it may not be enough. We know that at the end of the day, what counts is what is being said at the table. Therefore, we try to create all kind of very, very different kind of possibilities for various so-called stakeholders. It's an awful word, UN speak, but it's you and me. It's all of us. Those who have interest, those who have thoughts, those who have intentions to help, contribute, and implement. So we are trying to create platforms for listening to each other. Not only today's town hall, but as I mentioned, all negotiating tracks in the United Nations that are about to be launched will be open to you, will be open for your thoughts, for your inputs. The co-chairs and co-facilitators of the negotiations are expecting your notions. Who are they exactly? It can be traced in my office, but I'm sure we can iron out a good solution with the Global Communication Department, how to make it visible for you. Who are the heads of the negotiations, and where are the platforms you can send your notions, or how you can participate personally if the size of the room allows it. I would like to encourage you to live up with that possibility. Again, now we are designing a future of interlocking challenges. So your participation is not just let me to the table. Your participation is about influencing decisions, how you can influence the decisions. If you have an integrated approach to those problems we try to address. And if you have an integrated approach to the problems we are trying to address, you will see the possibility how they can find their ways into the solutions. If I'm very, very narrow, if I have very, very small objectives only, it may or may not find its way. Sorry for taking the time too long, but let me give you a concrete example. When we were designing the SDGs, it was more than a 2 years negotiating process. And as you know, we ended up with 17 SDGs. But I can tell you that there were proposals on the table for more than 240. And some of them are very similar to the ones we have today. Some others were very interesting. All of them are relevant. All of them were relevant. All of them were interesting. But I'm not entirely sure how the whole world could be moved by some of those SDGs. Let me give you two examples. 3. One proposal was, let's make a pivotal SDG on space debris. Space debris. Which is an important issue because the more satellites we have on the orbit, the more will be the dangers that those satellites will be incapacitated by debris. But obviously, it is a part of something. Another proposal was that the future of humanity will depend on whether or not we make an SDG on breast milk, which is absolutely important. We all lived with that. We are all coming from that. But again, this absolutely important issue is a part of something much bigger if we really want to move the world. And the third one of the most contested debates was, what shall we do with water? Water that is everywhere, that is influencing everything in our lives, in our development. And the big question was, how are we going to grasp this universal character of the water that is influencing our economies, social relations, peace and security, biodiversity, food, energy, and many, many others. And one of the suggestions was that if the water SDG will be about menstruation health and menstruation hygienes, and if we do it right, everything will be right. And I fully understand the gravity of this issue. I have a daughter. And in my family, a part of me, there are only girls. But I'm not entirely sure it would have been well understood by everybody in the world what kind of challenges are we going to have with the water. So my plea to you, take the big picture with your proposals. Take the image, what kind of world are you going to see in 15, 20, 30 years' time? And if you have an issue, what you would like to move, make it a part of the big questions. And on the issue raised by Rube, inequalities, technology, access to technology. It is a very, very pertinent and dangerous gap we are facing. We are in the middle of a technological revolution. Let's call it by name, it's a digital revolution, which goes much faster, far faster than any previous technological industrial revolutions happened in the last 250 years. Today, we have a huge gap between communities, between countries, and between individuals as well. First and foremost, in knowledge. Second, in access. Third, access to developing those technologies. But let's try to separate some of these issues to make it more understandable and more manageable. When we talk about access to technologies, let's have a little game. Please raise your hands who has a smartphone. As far as I see, everybody. It's an access to technology. Raise your hands who has shares in a company that is producing smartphones. Much less. Thank you. And raise your hands who are part of designing smartphones. I see none. these are, sorry. So these are very different levels and very different aspects of the same issue. How are we talking about access to technology? We should be very precise what we mean. To have an access to use the technology, it's very important. To have the access to be part of the development, or to have an access to be part of developing technologies. But in all cases, what we need, and I think this is a core of the issue, education, because I need to be well prepared what to use, how to use, for what to use. The second is investments. If we want to make sure that in my community, in my country, technologies are developed or at least manufactured, it needs investments. Third, in order to see those investments happening, we need regulations, which is a government task, and we need political priorities. On those two, I'm sure you have a huge task to perform. To have your say to your governments, your leaders, local leaders, where you would like to develop your communities, what kind of development you would like to see in your communities, in your cities and countries, and how you would like to see the priorities, because the priorities will then lead to the type of investments you would like to see generating access to different phases and stages of technology. Thank you very much, USG.
Thank you so much for that. Also, I think, the big picture of how much is incorporated in the SDGs, in the SDG blueprint. It really fits almost every initiative that I think is represented here fits in to some SDG or a spectrum of SDGs, and it is important for us to see things that way and how interconnected they are. So very much appreciate. The next question comes via video from Uwin Utu in Nigeria, and he's from the African Youth Movement.
My name is Robert Tutu, and I work with the African Youth Movement as an advisor. Your Excellency, in what ways do you intend to assist poorer communities to deal with climate and energy emergencies in the face of the current war in Ukraine? Thank you.
Very timely question. We'll take one more before moving, although we don't have one set up. So I'm going to ask you maybe to address that question immediately, and then we're going to open up the floor.
Thank you much, and many thanks to Uwem for this question, which brings us right to this day. But let us also try to separate some issues, because he mentioned climate and energy emergencies related to the war in Ukraine. Let's be honest to ourselves. While the war on Ukraine and war in Ukraine is the most horrible thing we have today in terms of political relationship, in terms of international security, and this cannot be accepted. It is against the Charter of the United Nations, against international law, and against all what we envisage as the future for all of us. But when it comes to climate change, the climate emergency did not start with the war in Ukraine. It started much, much earlier. Actually, it started 200 years ago, when we ignited the Industrial Revolution, and it speeded up in the last 20 years. The war in Ukraine does not have a direct implication of the climate emergency, but still it is one of the major issues, the climate emergency, we have to address. What the Ukrainian war triggered, actually, is the food crisis. And in many parts of the world, the energy crisis. Food crisis, because you may know that Ukraine and Russia are supplying about a little bit more than quarter of the world grain supplies and some of the cooking oil supplies, a significant part. In the case of some countries, their proportion in their imports is over 80%. In the case of the UN humanitarian activities, more than 90% of the grain supplied to vulnerable communities came from Ukrainian and Russian producers. So when the war broke out, these supplies actually were ended, at least temporarily. So what happened, the world markets reacted in a very nervous manner and sent prices to the skies, putting some of the most vulnerable nations in a very, very difficult situations. First and foremost, not all of them were able and capable of paying for higher prices on wheat. It's a food emergency, it's a social emergency, and it's a political emergency in a country. The second, even in those countries where governments, companies, customers were able to pay for higher prices, in certain cases, there was no commodities available on the market for weeks. What do you do if you are a government when there are no supplies and you know that you will run out of food supplies and you cannot provide it from internal sources? It's a real crisis. So that's why the Secretary General and the UN agencies took this task as the most urgent task the UN system can do to make sure that those supplies, wheat, cooking oil, that are now stuck in the reserves in Ukraine and Russia should find their way in a controlled manner to the global markets. They were very painful negotiations, but the SG succeeded, and I would like to congratulate him and his colleagues once again. They succeeded first for 90 days, and then in a couple of days back, it has been extended for another half a year. What does it mean? That 1.2 billion people who were affected by the food-related impacts of the Ukrainian war on Ukraine, are now receiving a kind of relief. It is not the final solution. The final solution to end the war. There is another aspect of these consequences, because if we work on how to make sure that the supplies can hit the markets, we can address the immediate challenges of famine in a number of countries. But these two countries, including Belarus as the third country, and I would even say Russia and Belarus first and foremost, are major suppliers of fertilizers to the global markets. Those fertilizers are missing now from the global market. What happens if the fertilizers could not hit the market in a very, very near future? It means in the next season, next harvesting season, in many parts of the world, the harvest will be 30% less. So if you reduce the grain supplies by 30%, it's a disaster. It's not let's eat a little bit less bread, it's a disaster. So the other huge efforts concentrated by the SG, Secretary General, and his staff is to make sure that despite the sanctions, despite the exclusion of Russia from the SWIFT system, despite the difficulties of how to secure shipping capacities, how to secure insurances for the supplies, to make sure that the fertilizers and ammonia from those countries could reach the global markets. For the safety and security and for the stability of many, many communities across the globe. And once again, many thanks for him and his all colleagues, including colleagues in Turkey, who were very instrumental in the negotiations. But still, the issue is not fully addressed, because we have an energy crisis as well. It's a very strange war. Very strange war in many, many cases. This war should have never happened. This war has no acceptable reason. But this war is being conducted not only in the battlefields, not only on the level of civilian infrastructure, which is targeted on a daily basis, but in the field of economic relations as well. So we have a set of sanctions, counter-sanctions, difficulties of supplying energies here and there. As a result, we had much less traditional fossil fuel supplies to the markets. What is the consequence? You may say that, hooray, we'll speed up our green transition. Yes, on the long run, I agree. It will be one of the consequences. It will speed up investments into the green technologies. But that takes time. But takes years, in some cases, decades, to develop and implement. And for you, for your communities, and for all countries who are buying energy sources from the world market, the big issue now, how to survive the next 2 weeks, next 2 months, this winter and the next winter. Because within 12 months, we are not going to solve the energy transition in the world. It will take much more time. So there are two negative effects, and let us not hide from ourselves. First, there is an energy crisis in terms of prices. It will impact all of us. It is impacting already all of us. There are many families and many communities in the world who will have to take very painful decisions because of this war, whether or not to buy food or to heat the room. The other effect is that reacting on the emergency situation, many countries started going back to more traditional fossil fuels to make sure that we are not going to get frozen. Going back to coal is basically against what we wanted, against what we agreed upon, because coal is 3 times more polluting than gas, and 20 times more polluting than any technology related to photovoltaic or hydro. So most of our countries, temporarily, we still don't know for how long, started going back to using coal. What is the consequence of that? I'm afraid this year, the greenhouse gas emission, instead of declining 5 to 6%, which would be very much needed for the 1.5 Celsius, will increase. So we're tracking back on our sustainability transformation goals. Still, if we keep the goals, and we have to, it means that those increases today and this year, maybe the next year, will have to be somehow compensated in the years after. A much steadier, much more rapid decrease of the emissions. But let's be quite honest, and speaking in realistic terms, and take the scientific evidence. In order to keep the global temperature rise under 1.5 Celsius, we need a decrease of emissions annually about 6%. Do you know when did it happen? It happened during the COVID, when our economies were basically frozen, when we blocked much of our economic activities. And that rate of decrease should be continued for about 20 years. We are not going to block our economies for 20 years. Instead, now we are increasing our emissions. So it's a very bad trade. Because of the war, we're going to pay a price in energies, higher energies. We're going to pay a price in social tensions, and we are going to pay a price in terms of climate change, which will cause us much more challenges in the medium and further down on the road future. Should we then give it up? No. There are two ways. First and foremost, I think, and I cannot repeat enough, this war must be stopped. This war has no place in today's world. Aggression, annexation of territories, bombarding civilian infrastructure has no legitimate ground in the 21st century. The second, we must do our best to get away from the fossil fuels, fossil energies, as much as we can. We need to invest more in those technologies, and we have to make sure that communities must have an access to those technologies, even in cases if the grids are still not built everywhere. We need to think about local supplies, local energy supplies. Thank you.
Thank you so much for detailing the complexities of the fallout all around the world, the ripple effects of this horrific war on everybody, but in particular those who are already the most vulnerable. I think we all saw how interdependent our world is in other dimensions that we never thought of. I think in particular the supply of grain and the supply of fertilizer and where it comes from. So thank you for outlining that. And now let's open the floor for questions. Please raise your hand so I can see you. We hope to get to you as many as possible. Please let us know who you are and what organization or affiliation you have, you represent. Over to you. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for this opportunity, Madam Melissa, and Your Excellency, Mr. President, for this opportunity that you have given us. Before I pose my question, I have just a few observations, just 1 minute. As someone who was once forced to escape my home country, I am all familiar with the repercussion of worldwide failure to care for refugees. Refugees in nations such as Sudan, Ethiopia, Somalia, Kenya, suffer a multitude of difficulties that we as a global community must collaborate to resolve. In their host countries, these issues vary from gender-based violence to lack of education opportunities. Eritrean refugees who are still stuck in Yemen and Libya who are being tortured, otherwise abused, need immediate protection, as well as Tigrayan refugees who lost their house in Sudan due to the horrific fire that raged across the refugee camp. And also the gross human rights violation in Eritrea, including the forced military conscription of minors, is the reason that thousands of youth are fleeing each month. And also the genocide that is happening in China or Uyghur Muslims. These are all world challenges that we really are concerned as young people. And the rampant sexual violence against girls and women in Tigray. In Tigray alone, over 120,000 women have been raped, according to the Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International. These are issues that are very important at this moment, and it's really challenging our world. And the human rights violation in Afghanistan and Iran of women. My question is, how is your government ensuring that young people, including those in refugee camps and those without access to the United Nations, have a voice in the decision-making process? And also, what is your administration doing to prevent genocide against the minority groups like throughout the world? For example, as a native Tigrayan from northern Ethiopia, I have seen and endured the atrocities committed against my people during the 2 years of the Tigray genocide. This is a very personal thing to me. How is your office working to address those world challenges that we are facing today, including the rights of minority groups throughout the world? Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Sharonette. And as somebody who once met you in a refugee camp, I am so inspired to see you here, to see you, the transformation that this country actually gave you by allowing, through the resettlement program, and a wonderful family who took you in, and now you're in university and you are an incredible activist. So I think we should all be inspired by your story. And just to let you know that our President of the General Assembly does not represent any nation individually, his own nation. Right now, he is representing all nations in the General Assembly, so I'm sure he will answer your questions accordingly. Let's take one more question. Over to you, right here.
Hello, testing. Okay. Thank you so much, Your Excellency. Thank you so much for having us here. My name is Jacqueline Kelleher. I'm representing Helen Woodward Animal Center, and I really was moved by your quote, the future must be sustainable or there is no future. And I hope that we can talk about if there is a place for civil society dialogue within the SDGs to address matters related to expanding resolutions that cover humane treatment of animals, because I think that is key to sustaining biodiversity. There's a conversation to be had, I think, for sure. We believe that having a deep compassion towards animals and building that, especially within our youth, will help aid initiatives related to biodiversity in the world, as it is humans who are having the greatest impact on animal populations through poaching, habitat destruction, and like. Most recently, we've seen the impact on animals through the war in Ukraine, where companion animals are being left behind, or people are struggling to bring them over the border and provide the resources that they need. So I hope that we can touch on the point about humane treatment on animals, and do you believe that there's a conversation that we can be had within the SDGs on that topic?
Great. Thank you very much for also bringing to everybody's attention the rights of animals. And so I'd like to ask you to respond to those two last questions.
Try to do it as brief as I can, since time is flying. As USG Fleming said, of course I'm coming from a certain country, but I do not represent any country now, and I have no right to speak on behalf of any particular country. But I'm trying to speak on behalf of all of us. Just this year, we witnessed 70 million people who were forced to leave their homes. 70 million is more than the population of France, is more than the population of the United Kingdom, is more than the population of most of the African countries. Altogether, 420 million people live in the world who found themselves in a different country than where they were born and where they were planning to live when they were children. There are very different reasons why we are witnessing such a huge number, and actually this number is growing. There are slow factors and fast factors. And now I'm only talking about the so-called push factors, not the track factors. Push factors that are forcing communities and individuals leaving their homes. Let's take first the so-called low factors, or slow factors, sorry. We are witnessing gradual degradation of living conditions in certain parts of the world, be it because of the depletion of the water resources, be it because of the degradation of the soil and degradation of the capacity of producing food, or being degradation of the biodiversity in certain parts of the world, which puts a pressure on the communities, creates additional tensions within the communities to the point that goes over the conflict management capabilities of the given institutions, be them traditional or non-traditional ones in a given country or community. When that reaches the point that the conflicts are very difficult to manage, without having the guarantees that those reasons would not cease in the forthcoming months and years, then people start leaving. They start leaving first to the neighboring areas, to the neighboring cities, or neighboring countries. Just in Africa now there are 12 million people on the road. In Africa we have the largest shanty towns. Some of them are much more populous than the capitals you live in. There are fast factors as well, also related partly to the natural causes, partly to human causes. Natural causes, when you see a very violent floods, like in the last month we witnessed in Pakistan, when the deluge covered 25% of the country, making millions fleeing for their lives. In most cases, in these factors, there is a good chance that people may return, provided if there are good chances that there is help and there is intention to rebuild better. In the case of the slow degradation of the environment, the chances for return and chances for the appetite to return are much, much lower. And last but not least, unfortunately, there are absolutely human-induced causes when local conflicts erupt and making communities fleeing for their lives. That's what we saw in many countries, from Syria, Eritrea, Sudan, Ukraine now, and many other parts of the world. If you look at the depth of the problems, these two factors usually combine and reinforce each other. In Syria, what we had, the worst drought in the last 900 years. Those worst droughts of the last 900 years basically annihilated much of the agriculture in the country and forced complete communities seeking refuge in the cities. Changing the ethnic compositions in the cities in a very short period of time, putting enormous pressure on the services, community services, creating tensions among different communities, and within a couple of months, erupting. And the rest is history. Similar tendencies we can see now in the Sahel. So unfortunately, many of the ingredients of the further refugee waves are now on the ground. There are two things what we need to do. A part of the details program is in the Global Migration Pact. First and foremost, we have to look at the given areas, given communities, given countries, how and what can be done there to make sure that people will not feel compelled to leave their homes. No one is happy to give up his or her house, his or her family, his or her community or country. We all are attached to that. If we take a decision that we have to leave everything behind, it's a disaster. Still, it's much better to save the lives than to remain in the disaster. But what we can do to make sure that let's do our best in those communities, together with those communities, not without them, to address the root causes, be it a more productive agriculture, a more embracing city environment, preservation of biodiversity in certain parts of the world, or preservation of the soil that is absolutely important for many, many reasons. A better management of water resources in certain parts of the world that can help us building the future of the communities there. But once people had to decide to flee, and particularly because of conflicts, then we are in a very, very difficult situation. Because our systems are not really prepared to address millions who are appearing in a certain city. Millions who are appearing within a couple of weeks on a certain border crossing point. The world does not have good answer for that yet. We have to acknowledge. We know the principles, we know the basic human rights. We agree that each and every of us were born equal, and each and every of us deserve dignity. But we don't have those techniques, resources, and maybe policies that could directly address those waves that might be coming. So first and foremost, let's work on how to prevent those waves, because it's a disaster for those people. It's a disaster for your family. It's a disaster for your community. And I'm sure it could have been much better if there would be better chances for developing your own country and community. But I'm very glad that at least you could find a career, and I'm sure you will be very keen to work for your country and your nation. On treating animals, let me address from two ways. How we treat animals, it is in a way reflecting how we treat each other. in those places, those countries where there is a huge respect to each other, you hardly see mass maltreatment of animals. So it's an indication about our values, about daily behavior, and it's an indication that, hang on, there is something danger. Because if we start treating animals, our environment, very, very badly, then sooner or later we're going to treat each other very badly. The second is not a smaller problem. It's about the loss of biodiversity due to poaching and many other reasons. You may know that we are now in the not even early phase, an upcoming phase of the 6th mass extinction of species. In the history of the Earth, 5 mass extinctions happened. Most of them were related to some kind of sources outside of the globe. The most memorable one we read about in our childhood, when a meteorite hit the Earth and actually it put an end to the dinosaurs. But what is the difference now? It's the first time in the history of the Earth that the mass extinction of the species is directly related to the activity of one species. It's us. It's a human species. So who can stop it? Only us. Those who actually ignited the process. The decline of biodiversity is as dangerous as the climate change. We are very, very close to hit a tipping point. In the case of many, many species, it's done already. They are extincted. But as a system, we are very, very close to cause unreversible changes that will ignite avalanches across the globe and across the whole biodiversity. We still have the responsibility and we still have the possibility to stop it. I'd like to offer to your kind attention that in 2 weeks' time, we are going to convene in Montreal the so-called COP15, which is the Biodiversity Summit meeting. It should be the Paris momentum of biodiversity. We should accept goals, commitments, and ways of implementation of what are we going to do to stop this 6th mass wave of extinction. Please watch and have your say, because it is the moment. A couple of years after, it might be too late. We can still do it. We have to do it together with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that answer that covered really the big picture and all of these dimensions. I'm doing a little moderation switch because I know the President of the General Assembly would like to take a couple more of your questions, and unfortunately I have another commitment, but my colleague Rob Skinner is going to take over moderating. So I'll ask him to take the floor, and I think we have time for about 2 more questions and answers, if that's okay with you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Melissa.
You're welcome. Many thanks. It's a pleasure.
Great. Thank you, Melissa. It's a pleasure to see you all and be here. As Melissa indicated, we have time for 2 more questions. I'm going to go kind of to the back of the room rather than just in the front. So all the way in the back, in the lower level here with red hair. Yes.
Okay. Hi, I'm Betty Levy. I'm from Seroptimus International, and I'm the newly elected Global OP for the Women's Major Group. President Kőrösi, during the Anger Week, you were quoted as saying, "In a world of new challenges, we need to build on what unites us, and we must build on trust." What unites us? We all want to make the world a better, safer, more equitable place. But it's very hard for NGOs to trust when member states are constantly changing the rules, reneging on commitments, renegotiating agreed language, all the while closing the space once open to NGOs. You presided over the historic open-ended working group that gave us the SDGs. I've heard you speak frequently about how well the process worked and your openness to continue the process in the 15 negotiating tracks is welcomed. And we thank you for the invitation to the table. But while that's a good step, it's not enough. During your presidency, can we count on you to secure a permanent path for CSO's full participation in GA processes so that NGOs are not dependent on the goodwill of individuals such as you? Because you're right, the time to be bold is now. The world is in crisis, and we all need to work together. Thank you for this opportunity.
Okay, thank you for that question. We'll have time for one more, and I'm going to go here, the gray shirt, yes.
Thank you very much. I actually have a written statement. I'm really good at it. Microphone, please, for the speaker.
Could you please push your mic? We cannot hear you.
Now, how about that? Okay, wonderful. I'll start again. And I will reiterate what my colleague also just mentioned now. I am Huri Gedelekian. I'm the chair of NGO Committee on the Status of Women, and I will read a statement that was prepared by my committee. We take great pride in representing thousands of grassroots women and girls working towards gender equality globally. Our goal as human rights defenders is to fight for our dignity, freedom, and safety despite the country or its leadership we reside in. Leaders and governments come and go, yet civil society organizations and activists endure and help shape global, regional, and national agendas in the quest for gender equality. We provide essential continuity to this work and are the voices, caretakers, innovators, experts, and activists fighting for everyone's right to live as they wish. An example is how we engage at the Commission on the Status of Women. We know the decision-making is with member states at the negotiating table, and we are respectful of that. We also know that permanent representatives and their teams rotate every couple of years at UN headquarters, while the average civil society representative works for over 20 years. Even the most well-intentioned member state representatives cannot know or be an expert on themes that civil society lives with on a daily basis. The lived experiences of activists and CSO representatives are diverse and unique and need to also be accounted for in the global agendas. The solution here is by partnership, allowing us a seat at the table with our recommendations valued as you would a member state, is to include our recommendations and work in solidarity with each other for true implementation of member states' promises and civil society recommendations. It is absolutely imperative that we as civil society work together in a collaborative, transparent, shared leadership model. We have found over and over again our own experts pay attention when they hear from human rights defenders on the ground who know what needs to be done. We are ready to find ways to implement government's commitments agreed on in global UN spaces. Civil society organizations and activists.
Yeah, I'm going to have to apologize that the President of the General Assembly does have a commitment. In a couple of minutes, he's agreed to stay a little bit longer, a little bit past the 12 o'clock deadline. Okay. So if you could, I apologize for interrupting your statement. Obviously, it's a very important issue. But if you could please proceed with the question, I apologize.
Absolutely. I will then just go right to the question, how do we implement shared accountability?
Great, thank you. And so I immediately turn it to President Kőrösi to respond to those questions. And unfortunately, as I indicated, these will have to be the last two questions, and we'll proceed from there. Thank you.
Thank you much. First and foremost, thank you for these questions, very similar ones, actually. Thank you, because these are standing issues, in many cases unresolved issues, recurring challenges. I wish I would be in the position to tell you that from this afternoon everything is done. I'm not entirely sure you would believe that, and I would not entirely sure I would be in the position to tell you that. What I can promise you that I'll do everything in my capacity and in my licenses to make sure that you will have an access to the negotiating tracks and processes. But also I have to remind ourselves that the stakeholders, including civil society, science, business, youth, women, indigenous people, people with disabilities, and many, many others, it's us. They have a role in their decision shaping. That's what you have to ask for, that you have to prepare for, and that's what we are waiting for you at the table. This organization is an intergovernmental organization. It means that the final responsibility for the decisions taken must be with the representatives of the states. If they do not take into consideration the opinions, suggestions of the decision shapers, the stakeholders, it's a very bad situation. I hope it is not the case. And I hope it will not be the case under my presidency. But let me remind all of you, ourselves jointly, that for the civil society, for the major groups to have their say is not only in the United Nations, it is a very important platform, and we are going to provide those platforms for you as long as I'm here, for sure. But you have another platform as well back in your countries, because you have to influence the decision of your governments. You have to make sure that women's voices must be heard and incorporated into the national policies, into the instructions sent to your missions in the United Nations. And if we do it from both sides, it should be a much better process, shaped much better. And coming back to the SDG process. Yes, I spent more than 50% of my time at that time while leading the negotiations with non-government actors. And I think it paid off. I learned a lot from you. And I tried to involve as much good ideas into the final product as we could. Don't forget, we are going to have SDG negotiation process now. We have to revisit the implementation of the SDGs. And it will be led by two ambassadors, one of them from Qatar, the other one from Ireland, who will lead this process from now to September 2023. And I've spoken to them personally, and they committed themselves that they will listen to you. They will let you in. They will ask for your opinions about the implementations and improvement of the implementation of the SDGs. So get prepared. Not only where is your seat, but how are you going to influence the negotiations? Thank you very much.
Thank Thank you very much, Excellency. And President Kőrösi, I did have the opportunity to watch as you guided that process during the time that the SDGs were being developed in a previous job I had. So I know how committed you were to civil society. And I know you're quickly leaving, but I just wondered if you had any final words for the group assembled here today before you have to go on to your next commitment.
Thank you much indeed. This final word is the word of thanks. Thanks for you for coming over. Thanks for you for sharing your thoughts, your commitments, your concerns, and your determination. It is not about the right or lack of right that you have the seat around the table. You do deserve a seat around the table. Now it's our joint responsibility to shape how we jointly make a better future. Please make your suggestions in an integrated manner. Make your suggestions keeping in mind the big picture. Be bold and be provocative. Carry on. Thank you very much indeed.
Fine words to close on. Thank you for spending this time with us. I mean, I don't believe that a PGA has spent this quantity of time in a meeting with civil society, over 2 hours, so very much appreciated. Thank you again. And thanks to all of you for joining us. It means a great deal, the civil society participation. We look forward to more of these and seeing you again. Thank you very much.